Satan. Hello, good afternoon and evening, especially wherever you are. You will be able to connect with us. So we're live at revelationtv.com. And if you want to write to us, please do, because it is interactive. We do have a special guest again, because he's here with us for a few more days and all the way from Orlando, Florida, and that is Dr. Grady McMurtry. Round of applause. Yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, really good to
More.
This is my first opportunity, really, to have you all by myself, you know.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I've been here a week and a half. And
yeah. Now, you'll be heading out here on Monday, so
Right, I'm going home.
you won't be able to do the Q&A show on Monday. But you could do a little bit of a Q&A tonight, could you?
I could.
All right. So
I would.
Yeah. Now, live at revelationtv.com. If you want to put a question to Dr. Grady, this is a great honor and privilege for us to be able to have him live. Normally, you do have guests live as well, but, you know, we're getting old, so you don't know how much longer we've got us, right?
I'm glad to be seen by anybody.
Yeah. But seriously, Dr. Grady, just again, remind some of our viewers who've not really had the privilege of knowing much about you, because this is an evening show and it's a Wednesday night, and they might have just tuned in for the first time.
It's been a long time since I've been on a Wednesday night here.
Yeah, it must be.
But I used to be an evolutionist. I grew up as an evolutionist, trained as an evolutionist. It is even worse. I was born in San Francisco, and I grew up on the campus at the University of California, Berkeley. So I grew up in the capital of liberalism, and for that reason was an evolutionist. I earned my science degrees as an evolutionist, taught it from the 7th grade to the university level. But at the age of 27, in a search for truth, which is what a good scientist should do, I became a Christian when I discovered that truth was not a concept, truth was a person. And so for the last 48 years, I've been going around the world on 5 continents as a teaching missionary, teaching on creation science and the truth of the Bible's inerrancy.
Yeah. Now, I know it has to be someone like me that would say and ask the sort of question about some of the things that you're really honored to be part of. Mensa, and what's the other organization as well?
Intertel.
Now, you're lifetime members.
I'm a lifetime member of both Mensa and Intertel, yes.
Yeah. Now, what's the intellect level that you've got to be at to get into Mensa for a start?
Well, Mensa's for the top 2% IQ, and Intertel's for the top 1%.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so there you have it at home. If you want to put any serious questions about how old is the Earth, or what about how did the universe start, and perhaps even talking about creation itself. And it's really important, I believe, to know where the start was, not the Big Bang and things like that, because otherwise it sort of makes a mockery of what Jesus Christ had to say and what he did when he represented his Father in heaven when he was on earth 2,000 years ago. So is Jesus a liar? No way. Is God a liar? No way. There is a liar, though, that was created some time ago. Well, he wasn't created as a liar, and that's the father of the lie that Jesus called him, and he was talking about Satan. Now, why should we be even thinking about the lies that have been told or put about, with regards to our origins?
Well, and that's a great word, because when we deal with creation versus evolution, we're dealing with the question of origins. We're dealing with the 4 most important questions in life. Where did you come from? Why are you here? Where are you going? And how should you behave while you're here? And so what we're dealing with are worldview issues. And worldview is like a lens through which you see the world. And so if you have an evolutionary worldview, that there's no God, that everything is mechanistic, naturalistic, rationalistic, what happens is it causes like a lens, and like my glasses, but a lens shape, where you see the world and you interpret the world in such a way that you would say, for instance, abortion, euthanasia, they're fine. Racism, lawlessness, they're fine. Because actually, even the atheist is religious.
In what way?
I once debated a guy who was a staunch atheist, and I kept saying, I've never met a more religious man in my life. And I meant it, because atheism is a religion. Because Christianity...
Belief system.
Well, yes, but even more so that Christianity says there is a God, the Creator God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, revealed to us in the Bible. Atheism is equally religious because it says there is no God. So it's an equally religious statement. There either is or there isn't, but they're equally religious in terms of value. And so, again, why should we look at this? Well, again, that's the atheist view, the evolutionary worldview that sees things with a certain lens. But if you become a Christian, the foundation as you become a new Christian and a new creation is not that your body becomes a new creation, because you're still going to shave the same face tomorrow, you know.
I hope so.
But the inside has been changed. Your spiritual self has been changed. And so you have a different worldview, because in changing from that one to the other, the foundational beliefs of the evolutionist atheist to the foundational belief of a Christian creationist, in changing the worldview, you change the shape of the lens. And so when you look through that lens, you're going to say abortion, euthanasia, it's murder, lawlessness, racism, and so forth, they're wrong, and you're going to know why. But they're both religious as well, because in Christianity, we receive our salvation through the work of Jesus Christ, and we get to go to heaven. That's the objective, shall we say. But if you don't have that creational worldview, then there's no laws, no rules, no standards of conduct, and no purpose. And that right now today, certainly in the headlines, people are without purpose. They're drifting.
But they don't, I would say, they don't realize they're drifting, because they become, like I was listening to the radio this morning at 4 o'clock, as you do in the morning, or I do, and listening to talk shows, and I could hear them talking about a young Scottish lady who's standing up for taking over from Nicholas. And the argument that they were having was, how could she have a Christian view and be in politics, and what was the Christian view? And then people started to talk about that, and they were saying things like, well, you know, we've got our own views, and the Bible's out of date, and why should we believe in something that was written 2,000 years ago, or even older than that, and follow the laws? But it says about having, you know, extramarital relations, there shouldn't be that, and the children shouldn't be born out of wedlock, and same-sex marriage and things like that. So they're saying our religion is wrong, but isn't their religion also their thoughts of religion as well? They have a religion.
Yeah. And again, they have a religion that says there's no God, and that there's, again, no laws, rules, standards of conduct, etc. Now, why do they adamantly defend that religion? Is because it supports that world view, the lifestyle that they want to live. And so if they want to justify living out of matrimony, or they want to justify same-sex relationships, transgender, all kinds of stuff, it's because it's their religion, and they want to do what they want to do. If you get right down to it, it is because of the sinful nature of people. People want to do what people want to do. They don't want restrictions. And because there is a God, the Bible, there are laws, and so there are certain restrictions. You know, we're not to murder. So in their case, they want no God, no laws, because there are no consequences. That they can do whatever they want to do, regardless of what it might be. And when they die, they simply cease to exist, and there's no consequences. They don't have to answer for anything they've done wrong. And that's their religion, and they're going to defend it as strongly as possible. And they were, you know, I think practically to the point of harassing this SNP member. But no one will defend anything more strongly than their religion. And for the atheist, they will defend it to the death.
Yes, but the argument was going on the radio this morning that they were even saying that they mentioned God. They were saying, but God's a God of love, so he wouldn't want to stop us from doing what we want to do, because he's a God of love, even if it's contrary to what the Bible says. And therefore, they were citing certain scriptures, you know, 1 Corinthians, 1 Romans, and obviously the ones Leviticus, which actually talk about the fact that God has a standard and he doesn't want that. But isn't that God showing love by allowing or saying to us, we shouldn't do this sort of lifestyle or that sort of lifestyle, because it actually causes harm to us, not just emotional harm, but physical harm in many ways?
Well, that's just it. God gives us laws actually to benefit us.
Yes.
And
But
the Jews considered the giving of the law to be a gift. But that's where the rub comes in, okay? Mm-hmm. They want to talk about God as love, the God of the Bible, Now, there are gods in other religions that are not gods of love whatsoever. But in Christianity, yes, we have a God who is loving and 100% loving. What they leave out is, and I'll simply throw a question out for everybody, okay? You hear sermons on, God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. He's all loving. When was the last time you heard a sermon on God is omnijudicious?
Which means?
All judging.
Yeah, you don't, because they don't want to.
That's because liberal theologians and non-Christians don't want the restrictions.
Right.
But these laws benefit us, monogamy, other things in the law that actually are medically, psychologically beneficial. And it's not a burden. To keep them actually is giving long life.
Okay, I've got some questions coming in already. Let me just say, it says, this one's from Tara. It says, ask Grady. Okay, I haven't pre-read it, so
yes,
hope it's okay. Okay, hello guys. Please explain fossils. Are they all skeletons of dead creatures, and are they still being formed to this day? Let's start there.
Okay, first of all, in science, the word fossil is a very loose definition. Everybody kind of agrees on what a fossil is, and yet there's no true scientific definition. Typically, we think of them as animals, plants, people that have lived, died, they were buried, and the flesh leaves, leaving only the bone. And there's a real misconception about whether it's stone or not, because what happens is often the bone simply stays there, is filled with mineral but not replaced, and most people think of that because the bone is heavier, feels like a rock, etc. But actually, we find a variety of creatures, including some dinosaurs, that are not truly fossilized, but you call them a fossil because we found them in the ground. On the other hand, it turns out they're actually mummified. And we have even found flexible, soft flesh, and in some cases in fossils that are supposed to be up to 500 million years old, which obviously is impossible. Molecular breakdown would have caused the material to disappear long before that. Therefore, it speaks of a worldwide flood 4,500 years ago called Noah's flood, in which these animals, creatures, plants were simply died, were buried in the wet mud layers, and were, quote, fossilized. But we often talk about fossils and also the artifacts that are found with them. So there's things like human tools, buildings, structures, all kinds of things. And we have found human artifacts, again, in layers up to 300 supposed million years old. Well, that completely shows that evolution of time is not true. That the millions and billions of years never existed. That the Earth, the universe, were created whole, complete, perfect 6,000 years ago. And that there was a flood in which these living creatures died, were buried, and they may have become fossilized, they may have become mummified, they may not have deteriorated at all because it's been such a short time.
What are some of the recent fossils that have actually shown from like Mount St. Helens, for example?
Well, I was going to say, and the other part of that question was, yes, fossilization, coalification is still going on today. Any farmer would tell you that they have dug up a fence post, and the bottom of the fence post was fossilized. It was stone in weight. Now, again, it hasn't been replaced by the stony material, the mineralization. It's actually just that the empty pores in the wood were filled with mineral. That's why when you go to a store and you find the beautiful, beautiful petrified wood where it's been cut, polished, you can still see the veins and the cells. And actually, often as much as 90% of the lignit's still there. It's just been filled with liquid material that then crystallized. But most people think it's replacement. That's not true.
Okay, let me read on, because this is actually from Tara and John in Galway, Ireland. It says, why do Earth lovers say they are millions of years old then? And how exact is carbon-14 dating of wooden items?
Well, it isn't just wood, plant materials of any kind, but also people, mammoths. Any living organism contains carbon-14 during its lifetime. And so when it dies, that starts to decay. And so we find carbon-14 in any living previous material. Carbon-14 does not work. and it will never work. It has 20 fatal false assumptions. It's absolutely valueless when it comes to dating things. And the same thing is true of uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, any of these methods called radiometric dating processes. And evolutionists really don't use them. They deceive the public into thinking they use them. But what they really do is they date fossils according to their theory, according to their religion. And so they have assigned a time to various fossils and said, according to our theory, this is 100 million years old. According to our religion, it's 50 million years old. But they actually don't use modern science. And when they do publish dates, they're selected dates. And what they don't tell you is that they've eliminated all the dates they got that didn't agree with their opinion, and they only publish those that supposedly back up what they believe to be true.
Okay. Oh my goodness, there's so many here. Let me get to Dawn. It says, can I ask Grady about before the fall, when animals and reptiles were bigger, were Adam and Eve much bigger too? And were their children what we would call giants? I think she know what she's talking about, the Nephilim maybe. And like those that have been dug up in a hole, or are they something different? I don't know what that refers to, but
perhaps the giants.
Yeah, maybe. Also, may I ask Grady what he thinks on the coming very large asteroid that is going to come very close to the Earth? There's a few questions in there, but let's look at the first one there.
Yes,
about the size of man, according to Scripture and things like that.
I'll make an opening statement, which is, first of all, if the genetic information was not in the body of Adam and Eve, it's not in you. New genetic information doesn't come into existence at a higher level of complexity or intelligence by random chance. And so in order for any of us to even reach the heights of 7, 7.5, even 8 feet tall, that information had to be in the body of Adam and Eve to start with. Secondly, from a biological standpoint, the maximum size of a human being, and this has to do with the organs and gravity and so forth, but the maximum size of a human being is about 10 feet. And there's a King Og mentioned in the Old Testament, for instance, who appears to be about 10 feet. Goliath was about 9 feet. And today we still see people. There was a man in America called Robert Wadlow. He was born in Alton, Illinois in 1920. And before he passed away, he was 8 foot 11.1 inches tall, which is pretty close to 9 foot. And that was just in the last century. That was less than 100 years ago. And so humans have that potential, but 10 feet is about the absolute maximum that you could possibly have, because after that, things don't work biologically.
Okay.
And so there's no reason to believe, other than that Adam and Eve certainly were bigger than we think of today. People tend to think of them as 5 and 6 foot tall. No, they were probably 7 foot tall, maybe even 8. But again, because of human sin, the decay of genetic information, the decay of the environment, we rarely see that height anymore. But it's a potential still in human beings.
Especially when you look at the likes of me, 5 foot nothing. But anyway.
Careful.
Okay. Believe it or not, this is from Eve, and it's about an Adam and Eve question. But Dr. Grady, my question is, if Adam and Eve were the first humans, what did they look like? Were they Jewish? And if we are their descendants, where did the Asians, the Chinese, the Indian, the Africans come from, etc.?
Sure.
And did each have their own sort of Adam and Eve, maybe? Could you clarify this? It's very confusing, says Eve.
Well, both the Bible and genetics tell us that we all did start with one man, one woman. And in terms of their appearance, they were average in the sense that Adam and Eve were not lily white, but they weren't black either. They were medium brown. They were olive skin, somewhat the color of those people of the Middle East today, because that's average from white to black. But in their genetic information, under different combinations, the skin color could go lighter or darker. This is very, very simple genetics. And so when you start with one pair of human beings, one man, one woman, and they have various genetic information in them, as the combinations are made for their children, one pair of humans can have children of 4 different skin colors in the next generation. It's not just that they continue to have the same coloration. Now, in terms of the ethnicities that we see today, that comes from the Tower of Babel. And so the earth starts to be populated by one pair. We don't know how many people there were at the time of the flood. There's a lot of speculation on that. Could have been 1 million, could have been 500 million. We don't know. But because of the flood, we do know that Noah, his wife, their 3 sons and 3 daughter-in-laws were on the ark. There were only 8 people. And the earth was repopulated by only 3 pairs of human beings. Now again, at that point, they're still very homogeneous in appearance, still very much in the average thing, and they only spoke 1 language. But about 150 years after the flood, we have the Tower of Babel. At the time of the Tower of Babel, God judges the people, not for reasons of sin as much as they failed to do what he said, which was a sin, but he told them to spread out and they didn't. And so he said, okay, well, if you're not going to do it my way, you're going to do it my way. And so they end up with 70 languages, and nobody knows more than 1 language. Nobody can communicate with anybody that doesn't speak the language God gave them. And it's because they can no longer communicate, then they spread out, which is what God told them to do in the first place. And we know exactly where they went. We know from Bible and from outside histories, we know exactly where all 70 groups went. For instance, Ashkenaz went to Germany. Mizraim, that's Egypt. And because of this, when you have small inbreeding populations, genetic information will become dominant quickly by elimination. So in one population, tall people out-reproduce short people, and after a few generations, it eliminates the information for short people, and you'll only have tall people left. In another population, it's the opposite. The short people out-reproduce the tall people, and eventually, after a few generations, tall people are eliminated. And the same thing is true of skin color, eye color, hairstyle, stature, etc. And so ethnicities develop because of the language barriers given by God at the Tower of Babel.
Mm. Now you're looking at it from the genetic side of
biblical
mankind.
And genetic, both.
Yeah, I like to remind people as well that when I read scriptures, I could see the records of the family groups, the family trees, and those particular genealogies are mentioned in Scripture for a very good reason, and you can actually trace them back to the 14 generations, and there were groups of 14 generations.
Correct.
Wasn't there?
Yes.
So it helps you to understand where you can go back to, and even when you start from those first genealogies that are recorded in Scripture, you end up being able to sort of see the lineage of Christ himself.
And Paul talks about this in the Greek New Testament. The word is ethnos, ethnicities. And so there's only one human race, but people of different ethnic appearance. And the ethnic appearance comes by elimination of information, not addition of information. And that was because of the language barriers and what happened in genetics, which is very simple to understand.
Loads of questions. You're going to have to be really quick to get these.
Well, that was
out.
one that needed a little more explanation.
Yeah, they did. I know, we did well. Okay, this is from Christopher from Ireland. What a wonderful privilege to have Dr. Grady live on the set. We're truly blessed. Yes, I would like to ask Grady what he would say to the Gap people who say that the world is millions of years old, but they go on to say that life was only created about 6,000 years ago. In my view, they are contradicting themselves, but not only are they negating the cross, but also Noah's flood. And he concludes with saying, Chris says, I'm 100% with you, Grady, that the world and the universe was created, well, I don't know about the universe, but the earth was certainly created 6,000 years ago.
Well, and the universe 3 days later.
There you go.
Sun, moon, and the stars are on day 4. But Chris, you're quite perceptive on this. The gap theory is not true. It was never the position of the church, although there were a few people here and there that thought, well, maybe there was some time there. But the gap was actually formally invented in 1813 by Thomas Chalmers in the UK. And unfortunately, he didn't have the strength of character to believe in biblical inerrancy. And he thought that the evolutionists of his time, and believe me, there was a lot of evolutionists before Charles Darwin, his father, his grandfather, for example. But he was influenced by these evolutionists, and he thought that they were good scientists, and he thought they were right, but he believed the Bible, and so he had to come up with a way in which you could have the two together. And the only way he could do that was to say that there was a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 of millions of years. The waters of creation in Genesis chapter 1 turned into Lucifer's flood. It negated Noah's flood to a local flood. Now, it is not true. I produced a video with Revelation on this, showing you all the theological reasons why it's impossible to be true. And all you have to do is read Genesis 7, 8, 9. God promises that he's going to send a worldwide flood, and he's going to kill all the organisms that live on the dry land except those that were in the ark. And afterwards he said, I did kill all of them except those that were on there. And so either God's a liar, that it really was some, or it's all, and he says it's all. In addition to which, of course, the physical evidence proves that there have been many, many floods, and yet God promised the earth that it would never be destroyed again by a worldwide flood. But there have been many floods since then. There's so many contradictions to it. It is not a tenable position in Christian theology. There was no gap. And I will add that scientifically, there are over 350 geochronometers that prove that the millions and billions of years never happened, and we don't need to make that compromise with the world. The science shows the earth is young, the universe is young, and the Bible tells us as well.
It's good to really quickly just explain how we've got some evidence that it was a worldwide flood and it wasn't just a local flood, and therefore you can provide that evidence.
Well, again, even biblically, 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter says the entire earth was catastrophic, the entire world. And God says he's going to send this flood that will affect the whole earth. And he says the water, if you go to Psalm 104, verses 5 through 9, that's the chronology of the flood of Noah. Psalm 104, verses 5 through 9. God sent a worldwide flood, verse 5. Verse 6, the water was staying above the mountains. Again, a refutation of the gap theory. Now, if the water was staying up above the mountains, it would at least slop over into the next valleys.
Yep.
And this is not the description of a local flood. It's the description of a global flood. And so we have other evidence as well. But the waters of creation are just that when God spoke the earth into existence, there was a water covering on it. But these are the waters of creation. It's not a global flood. It's not Lucifer's flood. And again, if you believe that, then you negate the flood of Noah to a local flood. Well, if that's true, why build an ark? Mm-hmm. Why not just walk away? If a few thousand animals die in a flood, God will replace them. I'm sure you've noticed squirrels reproduce fairly fast. The flood of Noah is definitely global.
Mm-hmm. What I find interesting, and I've been to the British National Museum, New Museum, and it's actually quite fascinating when they try to say, excuse me, all of these creatures, dinosaurs, were huddled together because and found in one place because of a great...
It's called fossil graveyards.
Yeah. And why are they there when they're in quite usually high mountainous regions?
But again, we're dealing with a worldwide flood. These creatures drowned. As the waters recede, dead bodies are deposited in depression areas, but then covered by mud as well, and they fossilize. What's interesting, dinosaur footprints on top of coal seams, not under them. We find them trackways, particularly along the Rockies in California and up into Canada, because this is where they were going to high ground to survive the flood. And we find that they were highly stressed, trying to build nests that were then covered by mud. We find, it's a minor technicality, I suppose, but we find dinosaur eggs with double shells. This only occurs when the female is under extreme stress. So they're running around with the flood waters. Now, the flood was not instantaneous. The Bible tells us the waters went up for 150 days, down for 150 days. So there's time for the more mobile creatures to head to higher ground, such as people, 4- and 2-legged dinosaurs. But they're being forced into less and less land, and we have to understand that there are these what are called tidal tsunamis, that as the water gets higher, and remember, the mountains that exist today were not the mountains before the flood. The mountains before the flood were only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet high. But as the waters rise up, they are eroding more and more land faster and faster, and there's less and less dry land. And these tidal tsunamis come up onto the land in really big tides until eventually there's nothing left to stop them. And they literally are called tidal tsunamis, where they go all the way around the world. Mm-hmm. because they've eroded all the land away. And of course, the creatures that were trying to survive then drown.
Loads of questions. Again, I just need to, if this is not your bag, just say, okay?
I will.
I might be giving the game away a little bit by saying that. I didn't mean it. It's not intentional, okay? Please can you explain the transgender issue? Okay. A teacher here in Ireland refused to call a transgender student they and was refused entry to his job.
Yeah. I think that's a great travesty. Now, I'm expressing my own personal opinion here. But God created man and woman, and he told them to reproduce. People who are talked into transgender or other lifestyles, this is not natural, it's not genetic. They may not remember when, they may not remember who, but they were talked into this kind of activity, probably by a close relative or friend. But it is not what God intended.
Okay. This is biochemical pathways, says this Les. How do evolutionists say new biochemical pathways, which involve multiple enzymes working together in sequence, originate? Every pathway and nanomachine requires multiple protein / enzyme components to work. Okay, so how does it all?
The chemical cascade, as it's called, or chemical chain of events, is absolutely phenomenal. No human chemist could come up with some of these things. And of course, there are creatures that have some of these chemical cascades, such as the bombardier beetle, a common example, would be impossible. It is of obvious design to begin with. And no beetle thought it up, that's for sure. So evolutionists have a faith. It's a religion that says that slow and gradual accumulation will do this. Now, when I was an evolutionist, I would have believed it, but in researching it further, I came to the realization by looking at natural law, natural process, and physical evidence that it simply wasn't true. Evolution contradicts every law of science there is, specifically the first and second law of thermodynamics. But again, even genetics. Genetics never is a process of creation. In genetics, we copy the previously existing information, pass it on into the next generation. If there's a mistake, it's called a mutation, and they ultimately always go downhill. There's always a loss of information. There's never a gain. And so it's impossible for these things to happen. But think about just photosynthesis for a second. We are alive because of photosynthesis. However, if you remove one step in the process, it doesn't work, which means that photosynthesis had to come into existence whole and complete, or we wouldn't be here. And this proves creation.
Interesting. Very good. Cynthia writes in, says, many people believe that the universe is expanding. Is this correct? And what is the evidence? And what does that mean in Christian terms?
Well, first of all, the Bible talks about God stretches out the heavens. However, the word there in Hebrew is the word referring to the effortless pushing of my hand away from my chest to my arm length. No effort at all, uniform. It's not an explosion. That's the first thing. Secondly, there are huge arguments between astronomers as to whether the universe is in fact expanding or not, because there are many ways in which what we see in what's called redshift could be caused by other things besides expansion. And I could explain a few, but we don't have a long time here. I would suggest, however, that you go to my website at creationworldview.org, go to the free articles section. There's a little search engine. Just type in, it could be light speed or Big Bang or redshift, and you'll find articles there showing how you can have redshift without expansion. And what's really important, if you'll take a look at one of my articles, and I'm quoting evolutionary astronomers and astrophysicists, we now know that the redshift is quantized. It occurs at specific repeating distances. And that proves that our galaxy is at the center of the universe, that we are special. And that drives evolutionists nuts, because they say that we are not at the center, we're just a random thing. But the science proves that we are at the center of the universe, our galaxy is, and that's exactly what the Bible does say, and it proves that, well, again, creation occurred about 6,000 years ago, and this is kind of like one of God's fingerprints to prove it.
I'd like to just put a question to you. you know, with the way that mankind's thinking, that pretty much we've ruined this planet and we've got to look for another place to live. And when they're doing all these space explorations, I think that's behind that. But what is so unique about the Earth as we know it compared to, say, other planets?
We have never found another planet anywhere so far that could actually support life. Now, to be specific, we have found slightly over 5,000 planets. Now, they're orbiting other stars in sort of our little quadrant of the galaxy, because we have not found them on the other side of the galaxy yet, because for good reasons. But in our little part of the galaxy, we have found over 5,000 planets, but none of them can support life.
And the uniqueness about the Earth is that the way it all works together.
There are dozens of uniquenesses. We're in what's called the Goldilocks zone. Close enough to be warm, not burn up, far enough away we don't freeze. So that's the Goldilocks zone. But the angle of declination for the rotation, our size, if we were 10% bigger, you'd be nailed to the floor by gravity. 10% less, and we'd be floating around.
What we breathe in and what...
The atmospheric conditions are perfect. And we now know from experiments, for instance, on diamonds that evolutionists did, supposedly with trapped atmospheres from supposedly 2.5 billion years ago, proves that the atmosphere has been the same the entire time. But evolutionists say that there has to be a reducing atmosphere to begin with no oxygen.
Okay.
And that it reversed to where we now have oxygen. But the evidence proves that's not true.
Yeah. Now, somebody asked a question earlier on. I did have a peep, but because it wasn't to do with creation directly, it was to do more of end times. I didn't bring it in.
Oh, those are all yours.
Exactly. But what I was thinking about, maybe to show just how much time we have left, not looking at it from an eschatological point of view, but more from a physical
oh, yes, there's many ways of knowing the Earth is not...
the half-life of you-know-what.
Yeah.
Where are we at with that? Because that's more your bag.
Well, that is definitely my bag. There are many scientific arguments concerning the Earth being young and not lasting very long. Mm-hmm. The single most prominent of those would be the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, we're not talking about gravity, we're talking about magnetism. But the Earth's magnetic field is decaying like a radioactive material decays, but the half-life is only 1,400 years. And when you track it back, this is a great argument for a young Earth, because if you were to go back to, say, the time of Jesus, the magnetic field was 3 times bigger. Go back to the time of Noah, it's 10 times bigger. You go back to creation, it's 20 times bigger. But that's about the limit.
So where are we?
Because if you go back farther, it would destroy all life. Now, on the other hand, the Earth's magnetic field protects us from deadly radiation, cosmic and galactic radiation. And it has to do with longevity and various other things. So it would go to zero in about 3,000, 4,000 years. But we would be dead long before that because of the radiation coming in. But there are other arguments as well. However, I would simply put it this way. God never intended the Earth to last for a long time once it became imperfect. So after Adam sins, there's an immediate decay process, the second law of thermodynamics. And I can't say that Christ is coming back soon. We always say soon. I don't know when. Mm-hmm. But I may not see that. You may not see that. Maybe my grandchildren won't see it. But we have the promise of Genesis 8, verse 22. Seed time and harvest, day and night, and so forth, will not cease. You read the Bible, it tells us people will be here to greet him when he returns. Therefore, whether it's tomorrow or 100 years from now, we have that assurance. But we also know that we don't have long.
Mm-hmm. Because those of us are into the end times thing, obviously look at the 6,000 year period that we're coming to the end of and entering into the 7th millennium, which means that Christ could come back, if our sums are right, somewhere correct, or within a period of, say, the next 10 to 20 years. I'm just saying that's one. It's not necessarily your topic, but it is something which might help our other caller, writer, who emailed in earlier on this evening.
And to the best of my knowledge, and I'll be corrected if you have something to contradict it, but to the best of my knowledge, there's not a single prophecy that has to be fulfilled that would prevent him from coming tonight.
That's true. Yeah. So we're pretty much there.
We have to be ready now
Yeah.
and plan for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know not the time that he's going to come.
That's it. Right. So looking at everything here, let's have a look. Fossils. Another one on fossils.
Absolutely.
Grady, what are anachronistic fossils? Did I pronounce that right?
Pretty good, actually. For the other people that are watching, I'll say we sometimes call them oop art.
Oh, poop or oop?
Oop.
All right.
Oop. O-O-P, which means out of place.
All right. What are they?
But these are things that supposedly should not be there, but are. These are the things that disprove evolutionary time. For instance, we have found a clay figurine in layers they say are 12 million years old. We find art, literature. We have various things around the world are human manufacture. We have found a small black iron pot in a layer supposedly more than 300 million years old. We found a dinner bell in West Virginia in a layer that's supposed to be more than 300 million years old. And so when we find the human artifacts that are out of place, obviously that doesn't fit with evolution. And also because evolutionists have convinced people that the fossil record, the geological time scale, it's like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's not the way it is. Often it's 1, 5, 3, 2, because the layers are upside down, out of order, layers are missing. You've got things like polystrate fossils. You have a lot of folded layers. There's a lot of things that prove that the fossil record is not what evolutionists claim it to be.
Okay. Cells, okay? Mm-hmm. Question for an evolutionist. How did multicellular life originate, and how did cells adapted to individual survival learn to cooperate and specialize, including undergoing programmed cell death to create complex plants and animals?
Well, I understand the basic question there.
Please.
First of all, again, the evolutionary process. If you believe in evolution, you have to believe that rocks become alive by random chance. That's the first thing you've got to believe by faith. Then you've got to believe that a living cell could come about by random chance, which is impossible. Then you have to believe in multiple cells, where, if one cell was so good, why'd they change? And then you have to believe it becomes 2 cells, 4 cells, 6 cells, 8, and so forth, to get to multicellular organisms. Now, I have a great question for you. Today, and in the fossil record, we have found many creatures that are 1 cell, and we found some creatures that are 2 cell. And we have found creatures that are 6 cells or more. But to the best of my knowledge, we have never found a 3, 4, or 5 cell creature either in the fossil record or alive today. So where's that gap? How'd that gap come around and still keep going? But the whole concept is absolutely absurd. Again, the laws of genetics prevent evolution from occurring in the sense of getting bigger, better, faster, smarter. The laws of genetics show us that things are getting smaller, slower, and dumber.
Including myself. Right, thank you.
Me too.
Okay, change of map, Julie says. Good evening, Howard and Grady. Great to see you both. My question is, are volcanoes and earthquakes, floods responsible for the change of the geographical maps? And what would God do with this?
Not quite sure either on that one particularly, but I would say this because of the recent activity, say, in Turkey. I'm not taking away from biblical prophecy. The Bible clearly states that there will be more earthquakes, more volcanoes as time goes by. However, this is a natural aging of the system. I think that Howard would certainly agree with me. The older we get, the more cracked up we are.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I make my wife crack up.
Yeah.
Just looking at me.
On occasion. But the Earth is not a living organism, in spite of what some evolutionists would like you to believe, and it cannot heal itself. And so earthquakes, once there's a relief in one area, then it builds up stress in another, and then one crack leads to 2, and 2 cracks leads to 4. And so there's going to be more and more earthquakes. That's a natural process of the aging of the system. But it is consistent with the prophecies of God, that he said this ahead of time. It was an absolutely perfectly legitimate scientific statement. And so we do see changes in the sense of that. And of course, volcanoes don't cause earthquakes. Earthquakes cause volcanoes. And so again, the more of this cracking, more earthquake activity, you're going to get more volcanic activity.
Right. This is from Carl, and it's really referring to what we started with, just giving a bit of your background and belonging to or being a lifetime member of Mensa, etc. It says, wonderful to see you both. Question for Dr. Grady. Are there other Genius Mensa members who also acknowledge the creative understanding that you have or know of?
Oh, yes. It's an interesting thing. I found out once I became a member of Mensa and Intertel that all populations are a bell-shaped curve. A bell-shaped curve, from a few up to the middle with the average in the middle and then back down again. So that's the bell-shaped curve, right? And what I found out that every organization has this bell-shaped curve. And that 2/3 of the people in Mensa are totally normal people, and there's that half of a third here and a half of a third there who are absolutely crazy. They're no earthly good whatsoever. They believe in incredibly weird things. But 2/3 of the people are just normal. We sit down, have a conversation just like we are. Same thing with Intertel. It's just a bell-shaped curve, and 2/3 of them are just as normal. Have a conversation with any of them, talk sports, talk science, it doesn't matter.
Right. I know that you've spent a lot of time in speaking with scientists at a very high level, especially before the war in Ukraine. You would go into the Russian
oh, yes. Well, I made 59 trips to Russia. I got out 1 year ago, 2 days before the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good people out there that also you can talk to on a level that is way above the average Joe.
Yeah, but I can talk to anybody. I don't care whether you drive a bus or whether you're doing something in a lab. It doesn't matter to me. Good
for you. Okay, let me just have a look. Read that one. Okay, let's have a look at this. Hi, is there any possibility that Adam and Eve were actually brought here by aliens, says John?
Okay, well, that's an idea called panspermia. And it was believed in by people like Sir Francis Crick in the UK. But what this really is this is evolutionists believing that evolution is true, but scientifically realize it's impossible on Earth. So they look at the laws of genetics, for instance. And while they believe in evolution adamantly because they do not want to believe there's a God. So evolution allows them to have the religion, there is no God, and there are no consequences, and I can do whatever I want. But they can see the science that says that evolution on Earth could not possibly have happened. So what do? Well, they're positive it happened, but they know it didn't happen here. So then they make up this fairy tale for adults that it happened someplace else, and that this mothership came by, dropped off the seeds of life with the innate property of being able to become more complex on its own. Then it went home to read the newspaper, and it has never been back to check the experiment. But it's called panspermia, the transportation of the seed of life, panspermia.
Okay.
But it's simply a Band-Aid to try to believe in evolution when they know there's no truth to it.
Okay. Who built the pyramids? This is another text coming, no name.
Oh, that's fine. We know who built them. The Egyptians built them, and we now know exactly how they did it. There's no mystery to it. I could explain it. I'm not sure we want to take the time for it.
Yeah.
But one thing that people don't realize is when they see the pyramids, that the stones, as you go up, the stones get smaller. So lifting becomes less and less of a problem, or getting them up there becomes less and less of a problem because they're smaller and smaller.
But the way that they moved those stones, very clever.
The first bottom third of the pyramids, you're talking about rolling big stones uphill on a sand hill. We know that. But once you get that first third, that's 2/3 of the building.
Okay, yes.
And what they did was they built what we might call kind of like a Swiss crane, but an elevator inside, that part in the middle there. And they literally, like an elevator, Swiss crane, lifted the stones up and put them in place. No pyramid was ever actually completed. I mean, they look like it, and you see one that still has the stones at the top where it says, well, it goes all the way up there. But you don't go up there and actually see it. The very last thing, you've got the pyramid coming to this platform, it's a square because you got the four sides, right? They were never completed. They were to have a special capstone on them. Now, we have found one. It's in a museum. But they actually never placed it.
Why?
Getting it up there.
Okay, I see. Actually, I've never thought about it before, but that's quite interesting. If you've got something that's going to rise because you're putting weight on it, and that's then when they take it off at the top, put the stones at the top, this is going to come back down, and the other lot goes up. Is that right?
Well,
something similar?
Here, as you can see on the screen with this picture, that's the pyramid that still has the cap. But if you'll look carefully at the top, the tip's missing.
Right.
And so while it looks like a perfectly good pyramid, and it is, basically, but the very final capstone was never put on there.
Okay. Right. We're running out of time, so get a couple more in. It's great to see you both. Wish you could stay permanently, Dr. Grady. It's so lovely to have you in the studio. Such a blessing.
I take that as a compliment, but the blessing is mine to be here. So.
You're an intelligent man, Grady. Do you think God made you so intelligent to enable you to put forward the truth?
Oh, I know it is.
Yeah. Amen.
It has nothing to do with me. It's all him.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. This one's going to take a long time to answer, and it's all about Daniel 11. Verse 36, as opposed to,
I'm sorry.
It's not your cup of tea either, in that sense. But anyway, ask Derek Walker, Pastor Derek Walker, on that question. That's Ruth and Paul, bless you. Okay, let's have a look, see if we can get another one in. And good evening, Dr. Grady. Would Grady agree with Derek Walker regarding Russia to invade Israel from the north and precipitating the end times? This is from Donnie.
But again, that's eschatological things, and it's the Gog and Magog in the north, and that's certainly a possible, reasonable explanation of the Scriptures' interpretation. Yeah. But it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah. Okay, another one for Derek Walker. You asked Derek Walker if he agrees with himself.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, there you go. And text again. Thank you, Howard and Grady. I would not be able to face things without your help and great programs. May God give you the strength to keep going. And that's from Jane Bond. Thank you, Jane.
And I say
James,
amen. Keep the Condors and the rest of Revelation.
Yeah. Do you know, I have to say, with all the things that are going on in our news today, it is reassuring to know what Scripture says. And I would encourage anyone who's not got into reading the Bible to do that, because I know it's something that people in this day and age, they say, oh, it's for fools. It's a book for fools. But who is it who was recently quoting the Bible? It said that, if anyone who says they haven't read the Bible or whatever, it's fools. It's the foolish one who says there's no wisdom.
The foolish in his heart, there is no God.
Yeah,
and
that's the one.
And just as a parting comment, I am a lifetime member of Mensa. I am a lifetime member of Intellect. Now, that's God's doing. I had nothing to do with it. Mm. But you can be an intelligent Christian, and we have an intelligent faith, and we have an evidence-based faith, and we have more than enough evidence to convict. And we are to study show ourselves approved. Mm. So we do intellectually have an apologetic. Yeah. We defend the Christian faith intelligently.
Okay. Now, Dr. Grady, lifetime member of Mensa, but there has to be the other side that the Scripture says, that God chose the foolish things of this world, some of them, like me, to confound the wise. Okay, so there's always two of us doing this. So if you want a proper answer to your questions, do get in touch with creationworldview.org.
And we have lots of free materials that are available. Articles, we have short videos, and a whole bookstore of other things too. But we're just one of the resources on this subject.
Yeah, and just got to say thank you very much for sending all these lovely questions in, and I hope that you'll be enlightened and that you will come to a full knowledge of Jesus Christ and our Father in heaven. Thank you for being with us tonight, and take care. God bless you.